The action for the 69th nice 12 Hours of Sebring is hot and heavy already. We've had a major star crash in a major way, and we've also got big-time news about Corvette Racing and their future involvement in IMSA. Let's get into it. So if you didn't already know, the MX5 Cup is absolutely awesome, as evidenced by their finish at Daytona that you may have seen. But potentially it has been topped at Sebring. Take a look at this video and tell me how great it is in the comments.
Looked like he'd thrown it away, went in a bit deep, and a brilliant move down the right-hand side by Gresham Wagner gave him the lead. But then it was, well, all elbows out. Carter coming up towards the pit wall might have thought that he had a run, but it was the car in the middle who actually gets the win. Hickson Motorsports take it. Celine Roland wins by 0.001 of a second. Then it was Carter in second for Carter Racing Enterprises. Spark Performance and Gresham Wagner, having led the vast majority of the race, comes home in third. Pick the bones out of that one. We're going to be looking at that for a very long time.
Speaking of awesome, Pippo Durrani certainly is at Sebring. He won the pole position for the Action Express number 31 Cadillac, their second pole position of the season. What else is new? While he won the pole, he did not win the headlines. Those unfortunately go to Jimmie Johnson, who had a heavy crash in turn 17 during qualifying. Now, Jimmie is okay, and this is what he had to say about the accident on Twitter.
Made a mistake, bottom line. Pushing to try to get into the top four on my fastest lap. I had a mistake out of 16, spun, tried to get back going, and just didn't realize how much trash I had on my tires as I entered turn 17 to come around and try to catch another flying lap. And went into 17 and just lost it and hammered the wall pretty good. Just to play things safe, we're going to go with a spare tub and put all new parts and components on it. This place is so brutal that we have the great luxury of having a spare tub and a lot of new parts, so we're just going to build a new car and take that into the 12 hours tomorrow.
And now we get to our major story in this video, and it's not the fact that Corvette Racing ditched their yellow livery for the first time since 2000 this weekend. The biggest news in the world of Corvette is that Sports Car 365 has reported that Corvette will not be building a GT3 version of the C8R for GTD Pro next year. Now, the link to that article will be in the description, but here's the key quote that comes from the racing program manager of GM, Laura Winthrop-Klauser. And here's what she had to say. We can't have a GT3 ready in time for next year. We are working with IMSA to understand, knowing that constraint, what could we do with them for the next year or so for racing, so when we're able to launch a proper GT3 car, we're ready for that. So obviously, this is major news because there's a potential, it's a small potential, but the potential is there, that Corvette Racing may not be in IMSA next year. Now, do I think that that's going to happen? No. But it has thrown quite the monkey wrench into GT Convergence. And what is GT Convergence if you don't already know? I talked about this at Daytona, but I'll explain it very briefly. Currently, there are two separate types of GT cars that race in IMSA. You have the GTLM cars, which are based on the World Endurance Championship GTE cars, which is formerly the GT2 regulations. It's been going on, that particular regulation set, since about 2004. It's nearing the end of its life. Now, World Endurance Championship has a fairly healthy grid right now, certainly bolstered by their GTE AM division, but we're starting to see manufacturers leave. BMW in IMSA has cut their program to just the endurance races. We were lucky to get Porsche this year thanks to the WeatherTech team and taking over a privately purchased car from Felbermeyer Proton. Ferrari is not a full-time competitor. They show up for an endurance race here and there with Risi Competizione. Corvette is really the only stalwart left in that particular class. And rather than wait until there's just Corvette left, IMSA made the decision to get rid of GTLM and focus entirely on GTD. And they kind of borrowed a little bit from the World Endurance Championship way of doing things, is in that they're going to split GTD starting next year into 2 separate classes. You're going to have the all-pro driver lineup, factory team, GTD Pro, still supposed to be using GT3-based cars, and you'll have GTD AM, which will be very similar, if not exactly the same, to GTD Pro, except for that class is supposed to be primarily for private teams with amateur drivers. So, here's what's going on with Corvette. As we read, and you can definitely read in that Sports Car 365 article, that Corvette is not planning on producing a GT3 car for the 2022 season, which is the first season that GTD Pro is going to be racing. So Corvette is doing one of 2 things. They're either going to completely double down on GTE racing, and they're going to go to WEC and run that and forego IMSA for 22, which, while I think that's a possibility, and Corvette is increasing their involvement in the World Endurance Championship, and I even said when they announced this to begin with that I thought there was a distinct possibility that Corvette could expand full-time into World Endurance Championship regardless of whether they start a GT3 car, because Le Mans is such an important event for Corvette, and it was really only the pandemic and the lockdowns and such that prevented them from going to Le Mans last year. The GT3 situation is one that the question now is, at least if Corvette is going to be in IMSA next year with a GT car, they are going to be running with a GTLM version of their C8R, and it will be BOP'd to GT3. Now, what's the problem with that, you may be saying? The problem is that GTE cars are developed in a lot of ways as if they don't have, as if they're not going into a super BOP'd class. They're designed and developed much in the same way that a car would be if it's going for pure speed. Now, they are BOP'd against each other in GTE or GTLM, whatever you want to call it, but those cars are very much different animals than the cars that race in GT3. So there's going to be a mismatch there, performance-wise. Either you're going to have the Corvette that's going to be way ahead of the competition, or they're going to have to neuter that car down, IMSA, I mean, to the point where it's woefully uncompetitive. It's going to be very difficult to balance those 2 types of cars together in the same class. Why is that a problem? Well, the problem is, from my perspective, you are going to be essentially shooting your GT convergence in the foot right out of the bat. You're going to be saying, okay, we're going to have, you've committed to having a GT3 only GT division. You're going to split it into 2 classes, but you're only going to allow GT3 cars. And the very first year out of the gate, you're immediately going to make an exception to that rule for GTD Pro. That's going to be messy, because it makes me wonder, manufacturers that were willing and able to bring a GT3 car into GTD Pro and were willing to do a factory program now may be asking themselves, well, why does Corvette get a waiver? Say, for example, your Ferrari, we were going to bring 2 cars, but we have a GTLM car. Why don't we just bring our GTLM car and have IMSA BOP it with the GT3s so that Corvette doesn't have an advantage? See, that's the problem, and that's where the muddying of the waters may possibly be. And here's the other thing. This may only be a 1-year commitment for Corvette. Let's say they don't ever bring a GT3 GM product out. That's official. I do know that there's the Callaway GT3 Corvette, and there's also a Cadillac that's theoretically eligible in the GT3 ranks, but GM doesn't have any plans to bring either of those cars into IMSA. That's going to cause... So if GM gets this waiver for 1 year, they may end up, and this is heavily rumored, that the next prototype from General Motors is not going to be a Cadillac, it's going to be a Corvette LMDH. So potentially, Corvette is going to be moving up to the prototype category anyway, and only having a stopgap year where they run the GTLM car and GT3. Now, is it in IMSA's best interest to strong-arm Corvette and tell them, well, either bring a car that meets our regulations to the letter or don't show up for a year? I don't think they will do that. I think they will allow the GTLM Corvette to race next year in GT3 or GTD Pro. And I don't know, what are the long-term consequences in GT racing in the United States going to become because of that? Because we've already seen IMSA has been willing to be a little bit sloppy with the rules in GT racing. Lexus is a great example. Love the Lexus team, glad they're there, but they're a factory team racing in, they're coming for me. They're a factory team racing in an amateur division. I know, look at this. I'm speaking the truth, and they're coming after me. Let's wait for it. The Lexus PD is here, and they're very upset with me for calling them out. But anyway, you have factory cars essentially already racing in GTD. Will those teams take the risk to go up to GTD Pro and purify the GTD AM category and actually turn it into what GTD really probably should have always been? Or are they going to look at Corvette and go, no thanks, I don't want to race them, let's just stay in GTD AM? That's going to be the thing that I'm going to be looking for in the future. Goodness gracious, here we go again. They are very upset with me right now for talking about this. I don't know what to tell you guys. This is definitely going to be an interesting story to follow with Corvette. And again, I think the ultimate thing that's going to happen here, for better or for worse, is you're going to have the GTLM car racing in GTD Pro for 1 year potentially, and then you're going to see Corvette move up to prototype. Is that going to be a good thing? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe for more motorsport content. This has been David Land on YouTube, and I'll see you in the next video.